There we go. And we're live.
Hello, and welcome to the Modern Romantic Podcast, where we celebrate and inspire romanticism by having a podcast with passionate guests doing incredible things. Hi, I'm a mystery wrapped in an enigma wrapped in a Totino's pizza roll. Totino's pizza rolls. Hi, I'm Trey. You can find me at OrpheTunes on most social media platforms. And I'm joined by my co host, Emily. Hi, Emily.
Hi. I didn't realize this was a commercial and I was unprepared and did not receive a script.
You're welcome. Enjoy Totino's pizza rolls.
Totino's, if you're out there and listening, please sponsor us. We love you. You
We'll
can
talk
email
about
us at please sponsor us. We love you at themodrom.com. And we'd be happy to put together a real commercial. Yeah. This is a great start.
And now to transition over someone who I'm really excited to talk about, and that who is not going to be any kind of scripted tonight, is our guest for this evening, who I'm very excited to get to talk to. Emily, would you do me the pleasure of introducing our guest tonight?
Yes, I would. Tonight we have a fantasy author who's the author of the Warminster series and also is the owner of Altered Reality magazine. Please welcome J.V. Hilliard. Also,
Yeah.
yay!
Thanks for having me tonight. I appreciate it.
So, thanks for being on.
And we can
No problem. I'm just trying to help you get back on the rails real quick.
Thank you. And we can call you Joe. Is that okay?
Yes, you may
Okay.
call me Joe.
All right. Awesome.
Perfect. So, Joe, you were talking to us before the show started that you own the Altered Reality magazine. Is that right?
That's right. So it's a e-magazine focused on both speculative fiction and speculative poetry, and it traditionally has been a portal to first publication for a lot of our authors and poets. And so when we've been approached by folks, most of the folks that you'll find that have submitted to our magazine, it's the first time they've had something published. And then others stick with us for a number of years and continue to grow. And we've been blessed, especially recently, by having a handful of our authors and poets up for major awards, like in the Christmas Story. It's not going to be a lamp leg or anything like that, but ultimately, the idea is we want to be there to help folks in the same way folks were there to help me when I started, and this is a way to do that. So we been working to help those who are trying to find that first outlet, and so we receive a lot of submissions from people around the world trying to you find a way. And when I say speculative fiction, people ask me what that is, and most of the time, that's when you think speculative fiction, you think things like sci-fi and fantasy, but that also includes dystopian. It also includes some horror. It also includes things that you wouldn't necessarily find in contemporary fiction or in your regular American literature section at their Barnes and Nobles. And so we try to help those that are going to write about things you might find in one of my fantasy novels and help them get published that way.
That's awesome.
Awesome. Yeah, giving people a chance.
Thank you.
Where is the farthest that you've received submissions from? Because you said all around the world. Where's the farthest away that anyone has submitted?
So that's hard to say. We've gotten it from, I think, 5 continents, right? So, we've
Wow.
gotten, I think the most recent one that I would say that was out of North America came from Brazil. We have authors that are in Asia. We have authors that are in Europe. We've started to receive. We've kind of opened up the door to other forms of art as well. Like we've been spotlighting traditional artists as part of our quarterly magazine. We have like a winter and summer solstice magazine, and then we have a fall and spring equinox magazine. And as part of that, we've tried to, allow folks that are going to make art, or create art, be part of the cover, and then we'll spotlight them in the magazine. We've had cosplayers for the first time that have approached us, on things, and so we've tried to, open it up to a little bit more than just the written form of art, and I think that's really helped us. But I think the most recent one we just launched a serial 6 episode serial with a gentleman that's from Brazil.
Cool.
That's not as far as some other places like Serbia, and things like that, but it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the magazine, from what I understand, is free.
That's right. So you can go to alteredrealitymag.com at any time and take a look at our roster of authors and poets. And we have them broken down. Sometimes it's individually sectioned. So if you're looking for poetry, you'll go to the poetry button, or if you're looking for stories. Most of our stories are short stories and or serials. And for those who don't know what a serial is, it's typically a chapter or less than a chapter that has a frequency of appearance. And so, if you're familiar with Kindle Vella, a lot of that has been that's serialized work where you're taking a chapter and maybe breaking it down into 2 or 3 episodes, and you're
Mhm.
reading it in snackable bites at a time. So something you can finish on your way to work on the subway or on the bus, or when you're in a situation where you're watching the kids in a soccer game. It's easier than having a book with you, and a lot of folks are enjoying that. I think that millennials on back to Gen Z, are really. I mean, that's the next thing. Larger books like mine and epic fantasy have a tendency to be a little anachronistic for the next couple of generations, and so it's a way for us to feed them something that's a little bit more manageable. I hate to say for lack of attention span, but honestly, we see a lot of that, and
Mhm.
so we've encouraged our authors who have a tendency to be a little bit more verbose, chop it down and allow us to present it in the form of a serial, and then in the magazine, the
Mhm.
quarterly magazine that we put out, which is downloadable as a PDF form, or you can just read it electronically on the site. We'll go a little bit larger, maybe 3,500 words per submission. Or if there's, photography or artistry or anything that we want to do with that, we'll allow them to have a page or so in there and then spotlight one of them once a month.
That's awesome. Kind of breaking it up along that for that serialized thing, it reminds me, I'm not big into like manga, but it reminds me of that where they're chopping up this huge long story into these serialized bites of things to allow more of a cohesive story, but also to kind of allow that breadth of the conversation.
Yeah, and that's for us. That's exactly, what we look at it as well. I think the manga examples is a really nice example because it's something that you can tackle without it being, you're leaving yourself in the middle of a story. And I know that, one of the folks just wrote in on our chat, how do we break the language barrier with artists from other countries? And she answered her own question. It looks like that all of our stuff we're required to submit in English, and many of these writers are bilingual or trilingual, and they're able to do it, and with a little bit of editing, in a lot of cases, we're able to clean it up, and they do have really strong publishable material. And over the last year or so, you'll find that more and more of our artists and authors have become published, whether it's through traditional publishing or they've gone the indie route and have multiple books on the marketplace and things like that. So we think it's a trend. We enjoy following that, and it's for us on a because we will put out the serials twice a month. We require that our authors do no less than once a month. If they're doing a serial, and that way they keep pace and people don't fall off because oftentimes what you'll find is the days of yore when you could write a book every other year and people had the patience to wait for it. Now, in this kind of like demand culture, what you find is people want to binge everything, right? And if they're waiting around, 2, 3 months for your next submission, they're not going to. They'll move on to the next and the next and the next. So we think we're doing ourselves our artists a favor by enforcing that, saying, hey, look, if you're going to do it, we need to make sure that you're going to submit in a timely manner. And in many instances, they'll submit the entire thing up front, then it's in our hands, and then we're just chopping it up chapter to chapter, episode to episode.
Cool. It reminds me of like the little shorter publications. Like, wasn't the Green Mile released that like that? Because it was based on in history they would release short little chapters like that at a time, and people would, I mean, it was a lot slower of a process because like TikTok wasn't a thing, but and the
That's
printing
true.
press was a lot more rudimentary at the time as well. But it kind of reminds me of those days, and here we are, kind of back at that, releasing
Yeah.
little snippets here and there.
Well, I think some things are cyclical, and frankly, a lot of it is better digested that way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for me, I have a tendency to write dense. I like writing, with descriptions, and my chapters average 3 to 5,000 words. Uh, Here, we're taking submissions that are 800 words. You're
Mhm.
looking at like 2 pages, and things like that. But it keeps people. There's a quality where it keeps people wanting to read, and that's why you're seeing, I think, the proliferation and frankly some of the success that the Kindle Vella or other serialization, um, you know, distribution channels allow you to do that. You're seeing a lot of that, and then sometimes you can do all that catch up too, where like someone's got 30 episodes and they can read them in a weekend, and they're firing through it and they want more and more. And so, it is a trend. And like you said, maybe it's come full cycle, come all the way back around.
How do you, so when you have these serialized things, and while you encourage your writers to be writing no less than maybe once a month, how do you balance the demand of a serial versus using that to keep people to coming back um, to your publication?
So, I think, you know, in a couple of ways. I mean, first, from the submission perspective, I think a lot of folks, once you get into a cadence in writing, it's easy. It becomes easier. It becomes habit. I always tell beginning writers and folks that I've not worked with in the past, or when I'm teaching a class or offering a seminar, I always say like writing needs to be muscle memory. There needs to be. It's almost like that you feel bad about it the day you don't go to the gym. Well, you should feel bad about it the day that you don't write. And I don't mean that in terms of you got to write a chapter a day. Just get
Mhm.
up and outline something. Even if you're putting together 3 strong paragraphs, it gets you into that rhythm that I think serialization allows for in terms of a writer. And then you'll feel the clock ticking on you. And for someone like me, who is a plotter and a planner to the end, like I love that, because then it's keeping me in that cadence. Those that are writers that I would describe as more like pantsers, or people that are writing by the seat of their pants, sometimes that can be a hindrance to them. But it does keep them honest. It does keep them doing that from the writer's side. On the reader's
Mhm.
side, it's the same thing. It's like, oh, I know that today is the day that they're going to release Boba Fett. Like, I got to be ready for it, and so I can watch it. I feel that clock ticking, and they're going to come back to the site, which is good for us and good for our advertisers and good for our sponsors. And we want to make sure that we're being there for our readership. And it continues to grow, and that's the kind of thing we want to see from that. So it's responsibility on one side, and it's habitual on the other. I think, especially if you're reading good stuff, you want to come back and read something like that. And I think that's something that you know uh, both sides of the table can expect.
Yeah. I'm going to pause real quick. Sorry. I keep hearing a ding, and it's affecting our recording. Can you, everybody just check their phones real quick and make sure they're quiet? I don't know.
Yeah.
I I'm hearing it through my earpiece, so I know it's not my, well, and I just checked my own phone. But I want to just, you don't have to tell me if it's yours. I just wanted to make sure it
Yeah,
was
I just
quiet.
turned mine off,
Okay.
so we shouldn't
Sorry
have
about
that
that.
issue. If it were me, yeah.
Sorry. Okay,
Okay.
I just want to make
No,
sure,
no.
because going forward, otherwise I'll have to sit and edit each one out, and that just takes forever. So this was a lot easier. Thank you.
No
Um.
worries.
Anyway,
I
sorry, Trey. Go ahead.
No, you're good. I think that makes sense. It's for me, I'm like when I want to sit down to write something, like I'm trying to come up with my own stories for a YouTube channel, and I have this idea in my head, and I know that I want it to be serialized. But it's that thing about like how long is it going to take me to write this? Am I going to keep my listeners interested in this? And it's a lot to consider and it's a lot to think about. But what you said about keeping at a pace and writing something every day, I think ultimately helps with that. So that's really good advice. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think there's three pieces of advice that I typically pass on to aspiring writers. That's the first, try to write something every day. I'm not talking about when you're on vacation or, you're not inspired. Everyone needs a day off or sometimes a week off in what they're doing. But, ultimately, even if you're outlining the next project or you're going back and just editing things, sometimes I find that editing or talking to other creatives gets you over that writer's block, which is item number two. Like if you hit a wall and you can't get around it, I don't care. They don't have to be other writers. They can be other creatives, people that are involved in art, or people that are communications people. Telling them what you're doing in a story, letting them come back and saying, "Well, this is the direction I think it's going." Sometimes that helps you get around or over top or underneath those obstacles. As part of that too. And the third thing I tell people is be open to constructive criticism. In fact, inspect it and want it. You have to expect it. When I get, my Amazon reviews or my Goodreads reviews on my stuff, they're not all going to be good. But you got to take the bitter with the better, right? And the idea is you can find nuggets of wisdom that you can learn from, and we'll all be better authors for it. And so I always try to send my stuff out, not just to my editors or a closed group of people. Find people that are beta readers that are around you that like your stuff, not your mom who's going to tell you it's the best thing she's ever read. That's not the kind of stuff you need. You need someone to say, I read fantasy or I read sci-fi or I read horror every day, every weekend, whatever, and this is what I think about it. And this is how you can improve it. Or there's a gap here. Or I don't understand why this character did something as opposed to something else. And that helps you go back, and hopefully it's before you've published something. But ultimately, even if you have published something, you become a better writer by listening to those things. And even though they might sting, that's okay. I mean, it kind of gets you over that hump, and you're like, oh, I'm going to remember not to do that again as part of that, because that's all part of the growing process. We don't all start out as the best writer we're going to be. We grow into it as we get there. And so, those are the three pieces of advice I typically pass along, to my classes, to anybody that wants to hear it, that is aspiring to become an author, because I think that's advice that's been given to me piecemeal, and I'm just putting it all together and giving it to someone all at the same time.
Right.
Well, that's really good advice. Thank you.
Yeah. I remember Josh saying that too. Our moderator, his father was an author as well, and he talked about him writing every day or writing frequently, even when he didn't feel like it. And I have tried that. Okay, like I'm not really a writer. I have written, but that doesn't mean I'd call myself a writer. But I feel like what that sounds like to someone who's not a writer sounds like something that's a little beyond me. But you're not talking about necessarily writing about your character or writing about the world, your character, whatever your main focus is. You're talking about I could sit and write something else, some detailed story about how my new kayak came in today or something like that, right?
Yeah, I'm thinking just something that spurs you. And I, making that muscle memory, that habitual feeling like I've got to do something. I carry around a notebook in my car. When I listen to music often will inspire me in one way or the other. And it might not be something I'm doing now, but it would be something I can use down the road. And it's that thing. Or challenge yourself, like whether you're at the office at work, or whether you're at a ball game, or whether you're at a party. Authors have a tendency, I think, to be very perceptive people, and people watch, and listen to conversations. And I'm not saying spy on people or sneak in and do, but you know how it you know how
Come
it is. You
on.
you find things, and someone will say something, and you'll be like, oh, that's a really wise statement. I've got to paraphrase. I'm finding inspiration in what they've said, even though it has nothing to do with my fantasy world. This is something that's happening in the real world, but I get that, and I'm going to embed that somewhere because it really impacted me. Or like a song, like you listen to the right song, it's going to put you in the mood for creative thinking, right? I mean, whether it's something that's sentimental or something that's a love song versus something that's heavy metal that's going to get you fired up to write a big battle scene, or just you hear even the goofy stuff, like you hear the theme song to your favorite TV show, and it just reminds you of something, and it pops into your head, right? And and that's Tolkien started writing the Lord of the Rings just when he was thinking about writing a battle scene. It was something that happened in his head, and he was like, what am I? I'm writing the scene, and all of a sudden, the Lord of the Rings came from it. And all of Middle Earth came from it, and The Hobbit came from it, and he's the granddaddy of them all. He's the fantasy author of all fantasy authors, and it came from thinking about something that had nothing to do with what eventually it came. And that's the way you got to look at it, is if you're going to be practiced and skilled in your art of authorship, just pay attention to it and try to find these little nuggets every day. You don't have to use them in your current work in progress. You can use it down the road, but I literally have a book of notes of things that will eventually end up in something I'm writing, that I don't know, like literally how that it's going to fit, but it's going to fit. I swear it's going to fit.
Cool. Yeah, that was a terrible response to that. Cool. No, that's really that's helpful, because you hear that advice a lot, and I'm sorry, Trey. Hold that thought.
Hold it.
That's really helpful to someone who doesn't write, who has heard the advice before. Oh, you should write something every day. Sit down and write every day. And to me, that feels like a chore. But when you put it like that, it's not the chore that it sounds like in just that little 4-word phrase. Write something every day. Do it. Go ahead, Trey.
No, it keeps you balanced. It keeps you going forward, even though you might not think. It's like, the day you break your diet, you're like, oh, I feel so fat. Like I ate that thing I shouldn't have eaten. I can't believe I did that. And then you try to get back on track, right? Yeah. Like we're all human. There are days where you're just not going to write. Like this weekend was a horrible writing weekend for me, right? It just happens. You try your best, and sometimes it doesn't work. You got too much on your plate. You got Father's Day. I got to drive somewhere to do an ice cream eating contest, for God's sakes. Like all this like crazy stuff that happened to me this weekend. And you're just like, where am I going to, you don't, but you just remember things and you try to take notes when you can. And that's better than nothing, is I guess what I'm getting at.
I have a coworker who, like when we're talking about creative ideas and things, we all go home and we all do this on our drive home. We'll be sitting there talking to ourselves about like an idea or how we're going to phrase something because we got some negative feedback about how it was written. So we're thinking about how to improve it, et cetera, et cetera. And then an idea will come to him. And because he's driving almost an hour home, he will whip out his phone and do these voice memos. And he will say something into it with like a little bit of context. And then he'll play it back for himself later and go, oh, yeah. And then really get into it. He's also in a band and helps them write songs. And I kid you not, he has literally looked at me, pulled out his phone, said something into it, and he goes, I'm not going to remember anything about what I just said into my phone later, but you know what? I wrote it down.
And I've done that too. Like I use voice, like the translation stuff, because I'll be driving and I travel a lot, and when you're on a plane and things, you can't always have your laptop opened, or you're sitting in an airport somewhere and it's inconvenient, but taking those notes and those voice memos, they do help you, because you want to go back to that and look at it and make sure you're putting it in context. You can find something you're going to do. I think that's a really cool, I'm glad you brought that up, because I find myself doing that, and I'm assuming other people do that too. But I have my cheat sheet, my notebook I've got. I went to a microbrewery of all places, and they had a 20-person book club. And my sort of like parting gift for coming up there and sharing my novels, they gave me this notebook on it, and it's like the Illusion Brewery. You could not pick a better name for it. The book looks cool. It's like black. It has its own little bookmark in it, and I just use it as my own personal writing diary. And there's stuff in there that's in like Joe shorthand, like no one else is ever going to understand what it means, but like it means something to me, and it'll be a reference to a character or a scene that I want to write. And you're afraid if you're in those situations, you might not ever remember them, and you don't want them to go by the board. So you capture it in this way. And in this case, sounds to me like, I'm not the only one that does that. So I'm glad to hear that.
connecting the human experience, one
Yeah.
podcast at a time.
One person at a time. That's right.
One person. Um, whatever, guys, I think that you capture your ideas so that you can go back and write it down, I think is really the point that we're getting at. Um, as long as you're capturing your ideas in some context, because you all are creative people, so as long as you're doing that, I think you're going to be fine. Um, kind of getting into, because you mentioned when we started talking about your magazine, how you are using this opportunity to give others kind of a start that you may or may not have gotten yourself. And one of the things that I like to ask is, how did you get started being an author or start writing?
Yeah, so I'm one of many COVID authors that were out there. My day job is as a defense and technology lobbyist in Washington, and I
Wow.
literally live in realism every day. But I'm a nerd at heart, and I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons since I was 10 years old. And I've always wanted to write a novel and never find the time, right? You're in college, I got a job. Your job when you're young, you're working 60 hours on the Hill. I worked on the Hill for 6 years and then started my own company. And, from there, like everything kind of, took off, right? And you just forget that you want to do that. But I've kept these notes over the years, and a lot of it has been memorializing Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, as stupid as that sounds, but it
No.
really isn't. When it gets down to it, there's a couple of things that happen. One, the story's battle tested. If you're a good dungeon master or you're a player that's in a campaign with other dungeon masters that are good, you're telling a story. Now it's a verbal story, but you're all experiencing that in your own group delusion, right? And in that group delusion, what's best and what worked and what didn't work. And there's something to be said about the time when you are dungeon mastering and you're looking at everybody else across the table and they're all looking back at you and you know that they're seeing exactly what you're describing, right? And so, for me, I used that over the course of 20 years and put together this realm of Warminster that didn't exist. And all I did was sort of knit all of these individual D&D campaigns together to create this realm. And then COVID happened and DC was shut down for almost a year and a half. Everything went to Zoom, so I didn't have to travel as much. My wife looked at me and she's like, I'm the kind of person has to be doing something or else I'm driving someone else nuts. And she's like, you're not doing that to me. You're going to find something to do. So like on my bucket list of things to do was to be an author. And I started writing, and all of a sudden I wrote my one book and I was going to get it and it was out of my system. And I handed it to a friend of mine who was an associate professor at a community college, also a published author. And she read it and she's like, this is publishable. And, I'm going to forward you to a development director because you need someone that can help you with dialogue and, pointing out holes in your plot and things like that. And my development director put me in touch with my publisher, and my publisher put me in touch with my editor. And it was like this crazy thing that happened. And, and then my publisher said to me, we don't do fantasy with one book. We do fantasy in series. And so it became a trilogy, which then became a 4-book series. And that's really where it came from. It was the downtime that I had that allowed me to take a breath. And I'll tell you this, I'm never going back. This is so much fun. And I say this in a way that I'm being respectful to my old job that I did for 20 years. I loved it. It helped me afford to do the stuff I'm doing now. But at the end of the day, there is zero pressure on me. Zero. Like I wake up and I go to a coffee shop and I write. Like how hard, if you could pick an existence to do, that ain't a bad one. I'll take that one 100% of the time. And I'll tell you what, I used to get interviewed on, TV, radio shows, whatever. And, I would prepare for 2 days for those things. It was like a high school debate or a collegiate debate where there was point, counterpoint, a gotcha moment from the host, all that kind of stuff. And my first interview was a podcast that I was doing as an author. And, I'm literally, I'm preparing for 2 days, to do this. And one of the first questions he asked was, which season of the year do you like writing in the most. And it was at that moment, you want to talk about a light bulb going off. It was pow. I was like, wait a minute, you're really trying to help me? Like you're illicit. You want me to? You're not here to hammer me and ask me why my things. It was like totally different. And then I went from someone who had dealt in realism for 20 years into someone that never wants to deal with it again. And if I could play the back nine and retire and doing this, man, oh man, is this fun? Like there is, I love it. And so even though if there was a silver lining in the COVID fiasco that the world went through a few years ago, it's the fact that I was able to pivot and do something now that I love. And I'll bet you, if you asked anybody I used to work with, if you said, "Hey, Joe wrote a book," they would say, "Well, it's an American history book, or it's a amateur military historian book." And if you say, "No, he wrote a fantasy adventure series, on D&D adventures," they'd fall out of the room laughing and not believe you. But that's where my inner nerd has now come out, and I am who I am, right? And I go to conventions and libraries and book signings and nerdathons and geekathons and have a fun time being who I am. And it's a lot of time, and I'm not going back. So I hope that answers your question.
No, that is an amazing answer.
Down to it, and if it wasn't for my wife saying you're not sitting around doing nothing, I was like, oh well, maybe I should write that, great American novel, and shucks, and I just locked myself in the den, and 2 months later came out with a novel that needed hacked to pieces and started over. I mean, it was brutal, but it got there, and all of a sudden it was like, all right, well, this is a series now. Are you ready for that? Are you going to invest in that? I'll publish you if you're going to do more than just this. And you made a commitment, and now it's off to the races.
Go you. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love hearing that.
Yeah. By the way, I see that there's a number of people chiming in. My go-to class is Rogue. As a D&D fanatic, my first character was when I was 10 years old. I started playing D&D, and no one wanted to be a thief. Everyone wanted to be the fighter, the wizard, and so I was the thief, now politely called a rogue. And ever since then, I've always kind of fallen into, roguedom, if that's a word. So, but like, I enjoy doing that. And I, look, I see another comment about still telling stories from D&D campaigns you're a part of in college. I still play with the guys that I played with when I was in middle school. Like we literally, we're scattered all over the country. Sundays, 6 to 10, kids are done. There's no school. The activities are done for the weekend. And we just get online. We Skype, as old school as that is these days. It's not using Zoom or, fantasy grounds we're trying to migrate into, but we still do that. And our wives will look at us when we get together for the holidays, and we'll be talking about, we'll invoke like D&D stories from back in the day. And you'll literally talk about them like they were real, laughing at people, making fun of someone for doing something stupid, inside jokes. And our wives are looking at us like, what? You guys are such nerds. Like, what are you talking about? That didn't happen. But in our heads, it did, and now I'm able to take the best of that and put it into something and memorialize it into a novel or a set of novels. Sometimes it's, characters get renamed and situations don't happen like they really did in real life, but you make a better story about it, something that's believable and readable, and you try to have a good time with it. And I think that's what's happened. I mean, I've gotten a lot of, without people even knowing that I'm a D&D nerd, they've said, oh, when I read your stuff, I feel like I'm in that scene, like it reminds me of playing. And I'm like, there's a reason for that. It's because it is, it's just, I'm just telling you, as opposed to you sitting there around the table rolling dice, I'm telling you what happened when I rolled the dice, and so it's a lot of fun.
Trey, what's your go-to class?
Bard, hands down.
Oh, I should have guessed that.
Look, okay, no. It honestly just feels so natural. Like for Joe, it's Rogue. For me, it's just Bard. And I can't tell you why.
Cool. Can you guess mine? I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
I'll say cleric / priest.
Not a bad answer, but incorrect.
Okay.
Okay. This is going to get really geeky, but which edition are we talking? Are you a 5th edition person? Are you a 1st edition person?
Right now, I'm a 5th edition person.
Okay.
But I can tell you, it probably doesn't matter a lot.
Okay. I'm gonna go either artificer or wizard.
Wow, it's paladin.
Ooh.
Yeah.
See, I was close with the
Yeah,
cleric
you were.
slash priest thing. I was there. So, I was in the ballpark.
You
Yeah,
were, for
paladin.
sure. I almost
Oh.
said that too, and I was like, I don't know enough about priests to be able to speak, so I'm just gonna. I'm fairly new. I played back in my early 20s, and then picked it back up again more recently. So I'm still not as well versed as probably either one of you. But
Well,
here we are.
were you part of the D&D revival during COVID when no one could go out, so everyone started doing the role playing stuff and kind of revisited D&D?
Nope.
Yeah,
Even more
yeah,
recent than that. Oh yeah, he was though. Trey was.
yep. I think I've seen that a lot with people, and then the advent and the proliferation of things like Critical Role and other shows. I've seen L.A. by Night, if you like the Vampire Masquerade stuff that they've done. They've really good shows, and they've introduced a lot of actors and actresses have now said, I play D&D, and here in Pittsburgh where I'm from, Joe Manganiello is a big one. He's trying to
Yeah.
get Dragonlance made into a movie,
Oh.
and I hope he makes it done. He's trying to do some show running for it. I hope to goodness he does. That's one of my favorites. But and I've seen other folks like Vin Diesel and the dude from Silicon Valley whose name is escaping me. I know that there's a bunch of folks out there that are just like, hey, I'm D&D too. They wave their hand, and now they
Yeah.
get to be on TV shows doing it, which I think is pretty cool. So,
Josh said Dragonlance is classic. That'd be a great movie series.
oh, Dragonlance. Like, look, as far as the old Dungeons and Dragons stuff goes, I love Dragonlance, anything Ravenloft. I mean, I'm a big like dark fantasy person. So, anything that's Ravenloft, the Strahd von Zarovich stuff, it's just so much fun. And then ultimately, R.A. Salvatore is my favorite author. So like the Dark Elf trilogy, and then beyond, what you've done with what he's done with Menzo Berenzon and all of the stuff he's done with creating like a dark elven culture, and you've got this ranger and Dritz who comes to the surface and kind of he's such a perfect sort of like Aragorn kind of character. I love that kind of stuff. So I would like to see any of that stuff made, and some of it's made its way into gaming, like video games. I'm a gamer, I'm sure you guys could probably guess, and or the graphic novel stuff. But I'd really like to see that hit the big screen. Dragonlance would be perfect for it. With it's so sweeping and so harrowing, and the characters are so cool, and there's so much comic relief in it too. I think people will like that. So
I think so too.
Two things. Emily, you'll be happy because I'm actually playing a paladin.
Oh.
In my current campaign, and Joe, you'll be excited because I'm actually playing in the Strahd von Zarovich.
Well, you picked the right class for that.
I did not know. I just was like, I really want to play this class this time, and my DM said, "Cool, thumbs up." Yeah, cause I am playing a paladin, but that is a conversation.
Trey, a paladin.
What?
Yeah, I tried to imagine this, and this will be interesting. I wish I could kind of be there as a fly on the wall.
Yeah, I recently, within the last 5 years, I DM'd a campaign that started with the original Ravenloft, and then went into the original Ravenloft 2 from like AD&D, like the first stuff, like the Gary Gygax stuff. And then right in the middle of it, they kind of updated it, and they had whatever the Curse of whatever Strahd now, and it has a bunch of other stuff around it. So I ended up like backing into the characters into that and just playing it. I think it is so much fun because you play it at the right time of year. You play it in October, things are getting a little nutty, and you're doing it in a way where you're around people and you can make people scared when you're playing that, and that's always just so much fun. The horror meets fantasy stuff is really in my wheelhouse. So I hope you have a fun time with it.
I've gotten a little skeezed out by some of the things that have already happened. And we, in full admission, and this is just my utter nerd coming, So right now we have just encountered Strahd for the first time. We were locked inside of the house with somebody that he's rather obsessed with.
Mm-hmm.
Our DM is playing him so well that I was skeezed out and I'm sitting away like 6 feet away from our DM. But it's going to get good.
Yeah.
And that's how I can tell it's going to get good.
Yeah, like it's so that sounds like you're like in Barovia and you're figuring out the whole Strahd dynamic and how he plays in. And I hope your DM plays Strahd as a real genius. I mean, that's the great part about that character. You get to play somebody who is so diabolically evil and smart that he can figure things out that the party's trying to do, and you want him to counter it. You know, it's just not some random monster like dungeon crawl where, oh, okay, let's go beat up on the big bad evil guy. This is somebody that becomes an arch enemy and someone that you'll remember especially when you get to Castle Ravenloft if you survive. And I'm not gonna. There's no spoiler alerts here, but I will say this as a former DM of it multiple times. There are instant death places in there, so just take it as like Tomb of Horrors, right? If you don't know what I'm talking about, like those who have played Tomb of Horrors back in the day, you will discover that anything can kill you at any time, anywhere. There is the death saves. Forget about it. I mean, I know 50 gives you these death saves, and that's fun and cute. Not here. Strahd is the man. So you'll have a good time with it.
Is that more of like an advanced level or advanced player kind of?
Yeah.
So no, there's
World.
differentiation in the old rules, like first edition, where the Ravenloft novels came from. There were no death saves. So when you went you hit -10 on your hit points, you were dead. Done, kaput, done. In the new rules, they allow you to roll to see if you stabilize as opposed to dying. And the higher level you go, the more hit points you have, the more negative you can be before you actually die, with a catastrophic death. But in Ravenloft, it doesn't matter. There are things that will happen that you just cannot survive if you're too curious or too dumb. That's all I'll say. I can't ruin it for that man right there. It's just so good. And part of me hopes that something like that happens. He's like, oh, that's what Joe was talking about. Son of a bitch.
I have been warned so many times because I've mentioned I'm playing Curse of Strahd, and people just look at me and go, "Oh,
Yeah.
I hope you have a backup character ready." But more to Emily's question, actually, Curse of Strahd is actually written so that it's for beginner players.
Okay.
It's made for you to level through like 1 through 10. If you make it to 10,
if you're not too curious or too dumb.
yeah, but yeah, it's a good time.
Okay. I would like to hear back then on your experience with this.
I will prepare a 3,500 word essay that I will submit to the
Altered
Reality magazine.
I'll be waiting for it, and I'll put it in our October edition. It would be perfect timing for it.
Yes. There you go, Trey.
First time paladin, first time death. Okay.
Strahd doesn't like paladins. He's coming for you. Don't worry. He
Good
already knows who
choice,
you are.
Trey.
Oh boy.
Could have been a bard.
That should be my next podcast. Could have been a bard.
Ooh, that's a good idea. I could have been a guard, but then I went into corporate espionage. That's like a running joke.
All right, I'm not sure where that was going.
Yeah,
but
it was
I'll take
we
it.
were joking when we tell the story of like how the podcast got started. We like to joke that like we used to be involved with the arts, each one of us, in different capacities. We both had some history in the fashion industry, but and theater. But Trey likes to joke that he was involved with corporate espionage. Like it's obviously not true, or at least he claims he signed an NDA.
I did sign an NDA. I can't talk about it.
But anyway. Um, Kaz said, "You guys artisty, artisty, artisty."
Art,
I think she
artist,
means.
art, artistic.
I know what you mean, Kaz.
Yeah.
Never would have guessed. I know we're so not creative and rigid, and we also have no fun ever at all.
I can tell.
I had a question about your approach with writing your books.
Yeah.
Um, so you talked about how you like the pandemic was what caused you to sit down and actually do the writing, but you had this already kind of playing in your head anyway because it was on your bucket list, and you picked a main character, which is Damus. Damus, is that right?
Yep.
How much did Damus end up being kind of like yourself?
Well, there's one very little,
Yeah.
but there is one, and this is I can't even believe we're talking about this, but I said no holds barred, so I'm going to go there.
Do it.
So Damus came to me when I was younger because it was a way for me to deal with an experience I was going through. I was having a set of recurring nightmares. And the nightmares were not the same. They would pick up where they left off, and they weren't like I was having them every night. I would have them once every 3 months, once every 6 months. And I had them from maybe like 10th grade to my maybe my sophomore year in college. And I used Damus as a way, like the character of Damus Alaric he's known as a keeper. And keepers are these people that are both blessed and cursed with this sight. They're prophets, they're oracles and things like that, and Damus is learning how to use this ability, and the visions that he has terrorize him, and it's because he sees the return of a fallen keeper, a keeper that has somehow gone afoul of their gods, and is coming back for revenge on the cathedral where Damus is being trained. Now, none of that has to do with anything with me. Wasn't a former character. It's not anything remotely close to my life.
Okay.
But the story behind his dreams is so close to the stories that I had in my dreams that it was like literally like sometimes when I talk about it in the right scenario, like I still don't like to talk about it. It's so true. But I figured if it scared me enough, even as a young adult, like as an 18, 19, 20-year-old guy in college, and I'd wake up almost in tears, like shaking, like violently upset, like being like out of sorts the rest of the day, the next day, as a result of it, and losing sleep, that somewhere in there that makes for a good story. So I dealt with it by writing it. As stupid as that sounds, almost like my therapy. And I
Yeah.
wrote this story over a period of a couple of years just to get it out of me and on paper. And then I realized, this is if I put this kind of spin on it, I can make this into sort of the main character arc between the arch villain and the good guy. And how can I, connect these things and make it work? And as strange as that sounds, that really comes from like having 13-year-old bad dreams. It's just so weird, but it's true. And that's where it kind of came from. So I don't see a lot of Damus in me,
Okay.
except for that one thread, and it's important to the entirety of the four novels.
Did that help you as far as like overcoming that fear to some degree, or was it just really difficult to revisit those in order to write about them?
I think it both, right? So in the beginning, writing about them was therapeutic, and it allowed me to kind of face it without facing it. And I never went to see anybody. I didn't tell anybody about this. Like few people knew about it. And then I talk about it more and more because it comes up when I'm giving speeches or I'm at events and people ask where I came up with the ideas. And so I think the more I talk about it, the easier it is to talk about. But even, I'm looking back at this, I was a 6'2", 220. I played hockey in college, and I was scared to death of my dreams. Like, how bad that makes you feel. Like
Yeah.
I'm an adult. Like, what is wrong with me? And these dreams weren't like I saw the same thing, but the same villain in my dreams would come back, and it literally just picked up where it left off, and it could have been 3 months, 4 months, and it was almost like I had never left that dream state. And the things that happened in that were, jarring and scarring and like bad things that happened, except for one thing. And then eventually I stopped having, when I refused to do what he was asking me to do in my dreams, he stopped coming around.
Mm.
And that I didn't really work that into the story plot too much, but that's really where it kind of came from. And I know that's an
Interesting.
odd answer. It's probably one you didn't expect. But I see more of me in one of my other main characters, Sir Ritter of Vulcaneer,
Okay.
because Sir Ritter was an old D&D character of mine. So I literally played him, right? And he was a, half elven ranger. And the story arc behind him was a little less dark. He was born as a borderlands knight to a low noble family, and he was looked down upon his entire life. But he had one of the more important jobs, which was to defend the borderlands from all these creatures that would come toward it. So that he was important to the king and the realm and all that stuff. But no one would give him credit for it. It's one of those things where he was just doing it for God and country and for the love of the people in his village, as opposed to doing it for all the wrong reasons, for fame and glory and all that kind of stuff. So I saw him because I literally walked in his shoes. I was looking through his eyes. It was my character, and it was easy to adopt. Where Damus was I had to reach back for that one, but it worked out. I think people, I hear about those two characters likely the most of the ones I've written. So uh, so one of them was easy, the other one was a little bit more difficult.
Right.
Because when you signed that contract, I'm assuming, and you knew that it at least had to be like a series, and you said it became a trilogy and then a four book series. Did you know what the end point was going to be, or did
Yeah.
it start evolving as you were writing the books?
No, all right. This is another weird Joe thing. So forgive me for bringing this up. But I write my stories backwards. I outline them from end to, and then to the beginning. And I mentioned before, I'm a big plotter, and I think part of that comes from my time as being a dungeon master. And as a dungeon master in the game, you have to be ready for any kind of left turn, right turn, downward turn that the party's going to take. And so you plan a lot of things so that if they do something, you know where you're going to go with it, and/or you have to be quick on your feet to fix things if they blow them up, right? I think that just comes from being a dungeon master and I think, frankly, a good storyteller. A dungeon master makes a good storyteller in many respects. But for me, I knew the end because I kind of knew where I wanted this to go. And so I wrote the ending in outline form and then started going back and putting together what the books would look like and spread them out. What I needed help on, where I fell down, was I needed to know where to stop each book, right? Like and my editor in the first one, I'll never forget him. He said to me, "This is where your book needs to end." Like bang. He said, "Take these other two chapters and push them into the next one. This is how it should end." And I'm so grateful because I get so many compliments on the end of the first one. Like people are upset that there's a little bit of a cliffhanger, but then they're going right out to buy the next one, right? So like I have no problems with that. But I planned it out from end to beginning, and then just started to fill in the pieces in the order. Now I didn't write book 4 before I wrote book 1, but as long as I knew where book 1 was going to end, I could then write backwards from there. And so it's a little bit of reverse engineering, but considering some of it came from actual gameplay, and it was fun to really build my own world, right? So I got a chance to do some things. Look, because I can't use Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk or anything like that. I had to create the realm of Warminster in doing it, and as such, I had carte blanche to do whatever I wanted to do with any of these monsters. I wanted them to be unique. I wanted things to come from that, and I was able to accomplish that, through writing I basically, because of the planning I did, I created a map just like I would create a map as a dungeon master. I did a lot of other things, like I created a pantheon of gods, like a magic system, and the characters in the novel are playing those roles as part of that too. So all sorts of lots of fun in doing it, but that's where it really kind of came from.
I see
Okay,
Trey thinking.
you've now given me deliciously wonderful ideas to start writing backwards. And see, this is why we have these conversations.
Yeah. Well, think about it in these terms. If you're a pantser, that's not going to work for you. Like if you go out there, like you're Stephen King, he just has an idea and it starts to write. Yeah, I'm the opposite. Like if you said, here's 3 words, write a story, I would freeze. I have to know what the end is, and I know I need, where I'm writing toward in order to, in order to be effective in my writing. And I always tease that there's no empty real estate in my novels. If something's in the book, it's in there for a reason because of the way I write. And so like I just, I have a big whiteboard in my office, and there's I erase things as I go through them, and that way I don't miss things. But part of that is just, I think, my writing style. And so that reverse engineered writing style works for me. It's not going to work for everybody, but if you think that you want to give it a shot, I mean, I knew the ending of book 4 before I knew the start of book 1. Just weird.
No, I think it's great because you learned what works for you, and it got you to do it. And I think that's the important part, is that it's the means to the end, and everybody thinks differently and organizes differently, and you found what works for you, and that's awesome.
Yeah.
It's not, I mean, you might think it's weird, but I think whatever it takes. We all do our own art and our own things differently.
Yeah, I wish I had some pantser in me. Like I wish I had the ability to do some of that stuff, but I'm such an extreme that I just trying it just doesn't work. Like I'm writing a Kindle Vella series right now to practice writing smaller, because I plan after the series to release a couple of novellas of like origin stories about some of the more popular characters in the novels, right? And novellas are a lot shorter than epic fantasy. Like my average book is 500 pages long, 150,000 words. And when you're doing Kindle Vella, you can't do that. It's 1,500 words. It's 1,000 words, and so it's a way for me to kind of train and discipline myself to write in a different way. And it's a struggle because it's just not natural to me. It's
Right.
like I can't think that small. Like, those little itty bitty short stories I would have a hard time writing, but hey, some people do it and they're better at it. So I'm trying to learn it, trying to give it a run.
I love that you're challenging yourself that way.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah. I mean, I looked at it as a way of trying to get better. Yeah. Being better at my craft. And that way, because, like not a lot of, not everybody likes to read epic fantasy, right? It's just too long. They look at the book size and they're like, holy God, it's going to take me a month to get through that, or a year to get through that, but in this day and age, everybody plugs into audiobooks, and, I see people like, then you don't have to worry about carrying it around or how far you're going to get. You just listen to it and just pause it whenever you need a break. Right. And stuff like that. So, hey, different strokes, I'm just on one of the extremes.
Nope. You go.
I was just going to reiterate what I said before, so it's fine. We do this all the time. We haven't figured out a way around it yet. I was just going to say that I have an appreciation for you still trying to stretch to do that. So even whether you're an extreme or whether you're trying it out because why not, the fact that you're going for something that's different just to see if you can and to see how it works with you is cool. And you might find that that's your new thing, and that's the thing that really takes off and really inspires others, or whatever. Either way, the fact that you're doing it, even if it's just for you, I think is awesome.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Now, Trey, I'm done.
I was just going to say that I had an American Lit professor back in my undergrad who I am very much like you. If I had my say-so, like my sentences would be like half a page long. And I recognize that I can write very lugubriously. So when I would turn in papers, I would get them back and it would just be like entire sections would just be crossed out in red and just like written in the margins like, you don't need this. Your argument is strong enough without this. And on one of my final papers that he gave back to me, he said, "You write like you are writing an epic poem, and what you're trying to write is an argument for this thing." Um, and he actually challenged me to write more like Hemingway, more like I'm forgetting the other author who he mentioned, but just to write more simply. And my response to him was, well, my teachers all loved my writing in high school. And he's like, you're not in high school anymore. And at an 18-year-old perspective, I think that was the first time that I had ever gotten negative feedback. Looking at it now, I think it's more along what you were saying, is that you're going to get feedback from everywhere. And recognizing that even negative feedback can be a learning opportunity can be a very effective thing moving forward. So I say all of that to say I agree with Emily in that you are taking it as a challenge versus or as just like a way to grow versus just kind of tossing it to the side and not doing something with it. So,
Well, look, I appreciate that from both of you. I really do. I try to keep an open mind to that stuff because I always look at it as iron sharpens iron, right? And
Mm-hmm.
in order to get better at what you need to do, you have to, it has to be read by people that are your peers and will say, yes, this is good or this is bad. Like I submitted something to a magazine once, and the woman who was at the magazine said, this is too much like Hawthorne. And I was like, what? Like, is that a bad thing? Like, to me, it was like, it slapped me in the face. And I was like, what does that mean? Or, I've had people say, that this is dark like Stoker, and they meant it's a bad thing. And for me, it's like, I read Stoker every Halloween. I reread Dracula because I love it. It's just so great. And then you just realize it's not always your opinion that matters. And look, not every piece of constructive criticism is right either. Some people are just never going to like your stuff. It's not for everyone. And you just have to accept that too. Like, there are times where I want my friends to buy my books and tell me what they think. And then I realize they're not really my audience. Like, as much as I want them to read it, they're never going to read it. They'll try to be supportive, and they'll buy it and they'll show up when I need them to show up. It's something local, and things like that. But at the end of the day, you're writing, I know who I'm writing to or toward, so not everybody's going to like my style. I don't like everybody else's style. And, but you try to learn from it. And like you guys said, I think it's important that we all challenge one another to do things that we're out of our comfort zone. And then you could figure stuff out about yourself or your writing style or whatever it might be. It doesn't have to be about writing. You can just, and you grow from that. And I think that's important because, my fourth book is, I'm a better writer in my fourth book than I was in my first book. Right. And you
Sure.
just learn from the experience of it all. So.
Yeah. Oh, Kaz said Dracula is my safe book.
I love you. I don't know you, but I love you. Dracula, I started October 1 every year without fail. And I've tried to even do like the audiobook of it, like the Tim Curry audiobook of it.
Oh,
Oh, it's ridiculously good. But I think that's kind of cheating. I feel bad about it, but
because it's
I always,
audio versus reading it.
yeah, like
Oh,
I like to hold a book, like even ebooks on my like Kindle or your Nook or whatever. It doesn't feel right. And I've got this weird like OCD thing. Like, if I buy a book, I buy it in paperback. And if I like it, I'll go out and buy the hardback and put it on my shelf to collect it and never touch it. Like, I cannot be opened. It's like a
yes.
like a virgin book. And then I'll read that. I'll literally read that paperback until it's frayed and ugly and whatever. But I will not touch the good hardback book that sits there and looks good on my shelf. And
Yeah.
I know it's weird or whatever,
No,
but it's the truth.
no.
it's relatable. In fact, I have the Lord of the Rings in a really nice hardback that was gifted to me, and then someone else asked me if they could borrow it, and I had to say no
Yeah.
because
Good
I was
for
like,
you.
no, we don't open that one.
Yeah. Yeah. No. That's the treasured one. You can't do that. Can't touch that.
Yeah,
Right.
no. Yeah, Josh said he does this too. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's relatable, and I've tried the Kindle thing too. I have books on Kindle, but I find that the way I'm drawn to reading is not like that, unless I'm maybe traveling in a place where having a book is cumbersome. But otherwise, yeah, I like having the physical book there. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah. So what? All right. So Kaz is asking, what does it mean when an author's book series gets worse after a certain amount of books? I've noticed in a couple of series after a couple of books, I just noticed the writing changes and stuff gets forgotten. I think part of it is a business decision. I hate to say it that way, but there are certain authors out there that have written the same characters in 30 or 40 books, right? And I think the characters kind of get stale. And I'm not saying that you have to be like George R. Martin, like, and all of your characters die eventually, and then you kind of migrate on to the next group or the next generation or whatever it might be. But I think that in some cases, you like a certain amount of characters, but after you get to book 6, 10, 12, whenever it is, and my dog is going to beat the door down in a second here, so I'm going to step away. For a second. I think the business decision is I've got a series. People are going to buy those books. This is how I feed my family. I'm going to continue to write them, as opposed to saying, this is where the series needs to end. And sometimes that causes an effect where people aren't going to they don't want to pick up a new character or a new series or any of that stuff. And give me 1 second.
Sure,
I'm
go
coming.
for it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Good.
Come on.
Yeah, I ended up buying them a copy of Lord of the Rings so that they could read it without taking my hardcover. Like, here's a cheap paperback version. You can do what you want with.
Yeah, that's right. You beat it up, and then you don't have to worry about it. You don't feel bad by bending the ears because you don't have an ear,
Right.
like a bookmark,
I
or
don't.
if the page
Yeah.
gets crooked or whatever. But that hardback has to stay pristine on
Mhm.
my shelf and stare at people, and no one's allowed to touch it.
That's right.
I even have you're gonna think I'm weird. I found this book maybe 10 years ago, and it's just a bunch of pictures, like close up HD photography of famous people, and there's maybe 300 in there. And on the cover of the book, they have Clint Eastwood, and even at like 70, he looks like a badass, right? And so he protects my books. It's the only book that I have turned out facing, and it's Clint Eastwood like staring mean at a camera. And that's like my warning to everybody that's coming in is like, Clint Eastwood's watching you. Don't touch my books. You're not allowed. These are off limits.
Yeah.
So,
He's your
I
book
forget the name of
sentinel.
it. It's a photography book. Yeah. It's the only reason I bought it. It was so Clint can guard my bookshelf while I was away.
That's awesome. I wonder if
you
Clint.
should
Oh, sorry.
no, go ahead. You should get that book and put it in front of your cutting shears for your fabric, like to ward people
Oh.
away from using them.
Oh. Josh said Squint Eastwood is still a badass.
I'm telling you, and that's exactly what he's just sitting there squinting. He's giving you that dirty, hairy look.
Yeah.
Don't come next to this bookshelf. You're not allowed in here. And people stay away. They're like, whoa, hey, I'm going to go. Oh, I see Clint Eastwood looking at me. And they put up their hands and walk out. That's just the way that's how I roll.
He's the sentinel.
I
love it.
In a bad way.
So tell us, I'd like to hear, maybe you've given us a lot of advice on writing or getting into like how to sit down and write. But like, what would be your advice to someone who maybe someone who is writing something and is interested in maybe getting it published or something like that? What would be your advice for them?
Yeah, so I think at first they have to determine whether or not they want to go the traditional publishing route or if they want to be an independent author. I mean, those are two different schools of thought, right? There's good and bad with each. I went the publishing route. In part, it's because I didn't know. Like I own several businesses, and as an entrepreneur, I was never afraid to be out on my own. And so the indie stuff appealed to me, but you always bet the horse, right? To use a gambling term. And I didn't know the publishing industry very well. And for me to say I was going to be able to go out there and be effective as an independent author was the risk profile didn't match up with what I wanted to do. And I knew that if my friend who read it and my development editor who read it all said this was publishable material, I knew that I could get a traditional publisher to bite. Now, with that comes responsibility, right? You're forfeiting part of your royalties. You're forfeiting, in some cases, rights to certain things. And if you want them back, you have to buy them back. There are options in your contract to do that. In some cases, people go out and get agents, and those agents then go and find them publishing houses that fit for them. But then you're sharing part of that revenue. And so for me, it was kind of limiting my risk profile and saying, yeah, I'm not going to make as much money, but I'm going to enter this marketplace with someone who's a friendly, that understands what it means to publish, sci-fi or fantasy novels. And believe me, my publishing house is called Dragon Moon Press. They guess what they publish, right? It sounds exactly what it is. So it's like 85% of her books are, right in my wheelhouse, or they're sci-fi or dystopian, or the fans will like that. And she's got a email list of people that buy from them, and she knows where to go to do all the things I didn't know what to do. So sharing a bit of that wealth, I looked at it and said to myself, well, I will, if I can't, if I it's like a small piece of a very big pie is better than a whole piece of nothing, right? And so I didn't know what to do, but I've seen and now gotten to know a lot of very successful indie authors. And you're out on your own, and you keep all your royalties. The problem is you're responsible for all of your expenses too. There's no one there to pick up your marketing. There's no one there to help you identify where you need to go, and the conventions you need to get into, or the speaking engagements you can have, or the radio shows you're going to be on. Like, none of that exists. So you're out there pounding the pavement on your own, like a true entrepreneur in a startup. And you've got to treat your books that way. So you are your brand, and your books are your product. Right. And so, as you're out there having this, like I have Big Brother, in this case, Big Sister Gwen is helping me get into all these places where I wouldn't be able to go. And indie authors are out there on their own. They're lone wolves pushing that through. And there's a code there, and other indies help other indies. Even though I'm working with a small publishing house, I'm not with one of the big four or any of that. So we even, I get invited to speak at a lot of indie things because I'm with a small publisher, a very niche publishing house. And so people see me as part of that band of brothers too. But I think that's the first thing, is decide which way you want to go, because getting published is not easy. There was that same woman who was the professor who read my stuff. She had been published before, and her publisher passed away, and she had to find another publisher, and she wrote to 141 publishing houses. And it was on the 141st that she got a bite for her next novel. And she, her first one was a memoir. She's now writing stuff that this is a real sort of like coming of age story for, contemporary fiction seen through the eyes of a teenage girl. So it was a different book. I get it. But, that's someone who's established, who already has a revenue stream, that already has a name in the business. And she had a hard time finding, a publishing house for that. So it's not easy. And sometimes they ask you to wait. You're not allowed to solicit this, or you're not allowed to send it around to anybody else, and you have to wait for us to get back to you in 90 days. And it's a very cloistered, closed marketplace. Like, you don't know the inside out of publishing, and they've been working the same way for the last 100 years. It hasn't changed. Where indie, it's like, hey, I want to give away my books for free today. Hey, you do. That doesn't work in the other market. So decide what you're going to do, and own it. And you can always switch. You can say after a while, I got 5 or 6 books published, I want to go and find a traditional house to run these through, or I'm tired of being indie. I need someone to help me, or I haven't been as successful as I can, and maybe someone there can help me. Or on the other side is, look, I'm going to buy my stuff, and I know what I'm doing now, and I'm going to go out on my own, and do it that way. So I think that's kind of step one, is decide that what kind of author you want to be, published or indie, and then run with it. The second thing is use the resources that you have at your disposal as best you can. And what I mean by that is build up your social channels. You'll be surprised at how many books you will sell, or how many followers you'll get on the basis of being on Twitter, on Facebook, on things like I'm on Discord, of all places, or Insta or TikTok. I mean, there are communities buried within these groups. Like Instagram, has Bookstagram, and TikTok has Book Talkers, and Facebook has a bunch of writing groups. And within those groups, sometimes you can share things back and forth. Sometimes you're allowed to solicit purchases of your new books. You just have to ask permission to, things like that, or like a Goodreads where you can go and add your books on there and people can buy them, and you could solicit, assistance from those, straight away. And I think that those are the kind of things that, I would encourage you to do. Also, like, build a website. Even though websites aren't what they used to be, they're still an important part. People need to go to that website, and the two things they need to do when they get there is leave their email address for you so that you can capture that email and send them the next time you have something that you're going to sell. And they have the portal to buy your book. You want to have a link there that takes that book, and boom, you can buy it right there. And those are the two things you need to find. Everything else is secondary on that website. You want to get that email address, and you want to sell books, and everything else is window dressing. So those are the 3, maybe 4 pieces of advice I'd give to anybody that's deciding that they're going to go down this track.
That's solid advice.
That really is.
Good stuff.
So, Joe, number one, I just have to say, this has been an incredible hour. I did not expect to connect with you that hard about Dungeons and Dragons. That was incredible.
Nerds. Yeah. I got you. I got you.
But to Emily's point, you've also given a lot of advice for writers, and it's nice to see someone who has gone from somewhat like a corporate, very government, as you put it, realistic job into something that they found their creative passion in, and really thrived in that. To make sure that our audience can connect with you, there are a couple of places that we've mentioned throughout the episode. What are the best places that our listeners can connect with you?
Yeah, so the easiest place to find me on social media is at JV Hilliard Books. If you go there, you'll find me on YouTube, you'll find me on Instagram, you'll find me on TikTok, and you'll find me on Facebook or on Twitter. Or if you look for me at JV Hilliard through Facebook and Discord, you'll find me there. Website's jvhilliard.com. And you can buy my books pretty ubiquitously. If you're an Amazon shopper, you can find it there. If you're in a Barnes & Noble, you can find or order it there. If you like audiobooks, you can download it on Audible or one of the other 20 distribution channels like Apple Books and things like that, where you can find audio stuff. So, find me there. The other things I would tell people to look for is late 2024, the video game from the Realm of Warminster comes out. It's going to be an augmented reality game in 2024 that transitions to a 2025 virtual reality game launched by Melderverse and their studios. And then I also am working on right now, working on very quietly because I don't have a publisher for it yet, the adaptation of my 4 books into a graphic novel series. So I've got an artist that's working on that right now. So if you're a comic book nerd like this guy and you like that stuff and you're an adult and you're not allowed to call them comic books anymore, you have to call them graphic novels, come and find me, and I'll have that. That'll also be out likely late 2024. I'm in the process of identifying the right publisher, and I do have a couple of groups that are helping me out on maybe an audio drama and things like that too. So getting close on those, and I'll keep people updated. So if you do go to my website or you do hit me up on socials, just feel free to hit me away. And I try to get back to everybody within 24 hours. So if you hit me at joe@jvhilliard.com, or you email me or leave me a message, I'll get back to you, within short order, and plug you into any of those kind of opportunities if that's what you'd like to do. Because I'm a gamer too, I'm a comic book nerd too. So finding a way to get my stuff into various forms of media out there, I think will only help the overall brand that I'm trying to build with the Realm.
Absolutely.
Well,
we can't wait. Yeah, we can't. Honestly, I can't wait to see the graphic novel. And looking at our chat, I think Archer is really excited about the graphic novel.
Yeah. Archer is a gentleman and a scholar, or she's a gentlewoman and a scholar. I don't know which one it is. I like Archer.
That's our moderator, Josh.
Archer is Josh. Yeah, same person.
Hey, Josh. Yeah.
He's gonna love hearing that, so that's good.
So, Joe, I really have to say thank you. And whenever your graphic novel comes out, would you be interested in being on the podcast again?
I would love to do that. I'll ping you as soon as I get a date,
Yeah.
and I'll even send you some stuff if you guys like that. I'd be more than happy to send you my novels, complimentary, of course. I mean, you guys had me on the show. I'd be more than happy to send you the first two, and the third one comes out next month in July, and the last will be out right before the holidays. So happy to send those along
Cool.
too. And if you want to see, I've got the first 6 slides without the words. It's basically just um, it's just the first 6 slides, which is kind of like the prologue of book one.
Okay.
And it is so eerie. It's awesome. I love it. Seeing that stuff in that kind of format gets you fired up.
Yeah.
I'll send those over to you too.
Cool. Yeah, I'd love to see that.
So as we close out the episode here tonight, please go support Joe and all the incredible work that he is doing. Please go buy some of his books. Please buy the video game when it comes out. Please buy the graphic novels. Just go buy everything.
Thank you.
This episode, along with probably every other episode, always in memory of Joe Capone, our moderator, fellow comedian, passionate encourager, and very greatly missed friend. Find us pretty much wherever you tune into podcasts. For updates, announcements, and more, please follow us on social media under Modern Romantic, and please help us reach our subscriber goals. Thank you, everybody, and have a Totino's Pizza Roll day.
Of course.
Well played. Well played.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.